Ladies and gentlemen, please rise and put your hands together to welcome our guest speaker, Mrs. Tan Ching, Permanent Secretary for Ministry of Finance. Delegate, please rise. Participants, kindly take your seat first. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise and put your hands together to welcome our guest speaker, Mrs. Tan Ching, Permanent Secretary for Ministry of Finance. A very good afternoon to our guest speaker, Mrs. Tan Ching, Permanent Secretary for Ministry of Finance, Mr. Pang Chun Hao, Principal, Hwa Chong Institution, Deputy Principals, distinguished guests, teachers, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second summit dialogue of the 12th Hwa Chong Asia Pacific Young Leaders Summit. I am Rendell and I will be your MC for today. Every year, during the Summit Dialogue segment of APYLS, we are privileged to invite esteemed guests who have excelled in their various disciplines to share their life experiences with us, as well as to enlighten us about pertinent global topics. More importantly, the Summit Dialogue is a valuable opportunity for all of us to engage in a meaningful discussion and to return home a little more fulfilled. This afternoon, we are honored to have with us Mrs. Tan Ching. Mrs. Tan Ching is the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Finance, Singapore. She is also Chairman of the Inland Revenue Authority of Singapore, Chairman of the Accounting and Corporate Regulatory Authority Board, and the board member of the National Research Foundation. She served in the Ministry of Education for 5 years, covering portfolios in higher education and overall education policy, leaving as its Deputy Secretary Policy. In 2002, she became the Chief Executive of the Infocom Development Authority, Singapore. Concurrently, she also held the post of Deputy Secretary, Infocom and Media Development at the Ministry of Information, Communications and the Arts. Mrs. Han returned to the Ministry of Education as its Permanent Secretary in 2007. She was Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Health from 2012. May we now invite our guest speaker, Mrs. Tan Ching, to commence the Summit Dialogue. Mrs. Tan, please.
Okay, good afternoon to you. I was expecting a wireless mic, but since it's not available, I have to look like a singer, but I won't make a very good impersonation of one, but I'll try. Okay, I thought I'll structure my talk into 3 parts. First, to talk a little about driving forces, you probably know a lot about, but I'll just put some color on it. Secondly, talk a little bit about how we deal with that in Singapore. And lastly, to bring the attention back to you, the young people here, talking about how to turn your dreams into reality. The 3 driving forces are quite well known and quite well rehearsed. Certainly in Singapore, we talk about them in almost every major speech and we worry about them a lot. Let me just go through each one. I think that the impact of technology is very often couched in negative terms in terms of job losses and threat to people. And if you look at its selection of materials here, unfortunately all in English, but that covers some worries from different parts of the world. But for those of us who are a bit older than the students here, we would remember that technological disruption is not new. The students here may not recognize what these things are, but for some of the teachers and some of your parents, you'll certainly recognize jobs that no longer exist, like typing pool or a bus conductor. You go into a bus and there's actually a second person other than the driver who collects the fare from you in cash and gives you a paper ticket. And then there's a third person called inspector who might come up from time to time to check that you paid the correct fares. But certainly in Singapore, these jobs are no longer available. When I was in school, my friend's mother was retrenched as a bus conductor. And if you think that it's only lower skilled jobs that are being affected, technology is now even entering into space where people thought they were professionals, doctors, lawyers, financial whiz kids. Some parts of their jobs can in fact be disintermediated. In other words, those parts of their jobs disappear. I've got this picture from, this is from the US, but I think the points here will be quite similar across our economies, but to different extents. Jobs are divided into 4 broad categories: routine versus non-routine, cognitive versus non-cognitive, or manual. What it means is that there are jobs which require thinking skills, there are jobs which require you to use your hands, to move, and to have a skill. And then there are routine and non-routine. The key point is not whether it's manual or cognitive, which corresponds to the old blue-collar, white-collar type of divide, but whether within that job, the tasks within it are routine or non-routine. What might be non-routine? Non-routine manual could be a person acting as a healthcare assistant, working in a home for the aged, elderly people, and they help them with their daily needs, comforting them, checking whether they're feeling down, and being able to help them with the activities of daily living. You need emotional rapport, you need judgment, you need wisdom, you need a certain amount of emotional maturity to deal with it. This is non-routine, even though the work, most of it is manual. You are feeding the person, you may be helping them up from a seat and so on. It's manual work, but it's non-routine. So it's not that easy to reduce all of the work into a set of instructions which you can then program a robot to do. So some of the lawyers, conveyancing lawyers, lawyers who deal with transaction of properties, may think they're in a professional job. But much of conveyancing work is actually routine clerical work that with computerized databases can now be performed much cheaper, more accurately by artificial intelligence. That parts of a lawyer's job will disappear. So do not just believe old people who tell you, just go get a professional degree and you will be set for life. It may not be, because many aspects of this job will indeed disappear. But if you look at technology, I don't think we should completely paint it in a sort of gloom and doom and negative way. We also should look at it as a force for good, because every wave of technological change has brought about modern conveniences, better ways of doing things, less backbreaking, less unhealthy ways of doing things, which all of us have benefited, even though the people in the middle of the change may get disrupted, their routines disrupted, their lives disrupted, but they also bring forth new ideas, new companies, new businesses. For example, Gojek is an Indonesian technology company. Its platform has allowed millions of women who are less included in many economic activities to be able to now participate in the economy. So the important part is not to think about change as let's push it aside, but to find a way to deal with it and to manage it. So that's one. Let me now go on to the second driving force, which is one of demographic change. Many of you will recognize these population pyramids, age group, from the youngest to the oldest, and you find that the entire world, on average, that means if you add up the population in the world, has aged. So from this, what really looks like a pyramid, to an age structure in 2016 that looks like a pillar. Right? And here we are sort of having a bit of a middle-aged bout, but here we really look like a pillar. That means there are more and more older people in the world. And that pattern of aging is not even across the world. There are countries where the population will remain relatively young, and there are places where the population will become a lot more aging. Just within Asia, you can see, I've just picked two large economies, large countries, of course one much larger than the other, to give you a sense that it looks so different, as if one is the inverted shape of the other. So one implication might be, if we have complementary demographic structures, does it drive migration, one direction or both? That's an interesting thought. Maybe one economy needs young workers, another has enough young workers and is quite happy to export. Maybe. The third is what I call geopolitics, but let me talk with the economic part first. If it were possible to calculate a center of gravity based on the GDP of the world, then I would say that it started big history where we can, if you believe this, year one, it sort of went west. No surprises, because the Industrial Revolution happened in this tiny little island of continental Europe. And then, of course, the Americans got very rich, so the center of gravity went there. And in the last 50 years, has come back towards the east to somewhere in Central Asia. Well, don't take the points as gospel truth, but the big story is that the economic weight of Asia is rising, and rapidly so. This is a chart of GDP in market exchange rates, at market exchange rates, and by this chart, the size of the Chinese economy will exceed that of the US in the year 2025. That's based on what we call nominal exchange rates or market exchange rates. But if you convert the GDP in using a concept called purchasing power parity, because $1 US can buy more in China than it can in the US, then by some calculations, the size of the Chinese economy is already larger than the US economy. Now, this does not mean that the Chinese per capita GDP is identical to the US one. It's still some way to go. But in terms of sheer economic size, it's already exceeded the US in what economists call PPP terms, purchasing power parity terms. In international trade, I think there have been very interesting developments in the last couple of years. I picked two photos because they are interesting and they catch your attention, not because they describe fully the world as we see it. The left picture, as it turns out, is a somewhat cropped picture of a larger picture that's going on, because very often leaders stand around and talk to each other, but they purposely cropped it to show lots of people standing here and one person folding his arms. But that's not the full picture, but it more or less captures the fact that someone is holding out. And on the right is a more recent picture of 19 economies who have come together to sign what they call Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It was meant to have been the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Unfortunately, in the changeover between the Obama and the Trump administration, the US decided to pull out of it, and the rest of the economies decided that they would go ahead with something less ambitious, while leaving a seat empty at the table for the US to return when it is ready to do so. So that's the CPTPP. So I think it's a journey where some steps move us forward and some steps may move us sideways or backwards. But I think generally I would say, I hope that the journey is one that moves us forward. Now, the world has not seen a transition between one major power to another since around the turn of the 20th century, when essentially Britain gave way to America. Sometime during your lifetime, maybe not mine, but certainly your lifetime, you will witness another big change of power, transfer of power from America to China. It will happen. It's when and how it happens, and when it happens, whether you end up with a few large economies approximately the same size, or one extremely large one and many others much smaller. And as it happens, the process of it, is it going to be a fairly orderly, friendly one, or is it going to be one fraught with a lot of tensions, proxy fights and all that? We will not know. but it will be in your interest and my interest to see it unfold in as peaceful a way as possible. So, if I may summarize, there are these huge changes that are hitting the world that we know. They're happening all at the same time. Technological change that is at a huge pace. Digitalization is going to change everything that we know, from the way we work to the way we live, and so on. The world will get more aged on average, but some parts of the world will remain young, while many, many parts will get older and older. And lastly, we are seeing a transition towards a new world order. There's no way to gainsay, there's no way to delay, it's going to happen. It's how long it takes and what will the end point be when that happens. And in its wake, some of these changes bring about a number of social impact which we cannot ignore. One is that of income inequality. Many of us will hear the issue of income inequality being discussed in our own countries. And I'll just show you some data here. Again, taken from the US, partly because they just have better data, but it will largely apply to most other economies. Left side, data for men, and right side for women, all indexed to 1 or 100 in year 1964. Don't ask me why we chose 1964, I think it's a good year. And you look at each of the lines. Basically, if you look at the lowest line, the dark blue line, that is the wages of people who dropped out from high school. In other words, they didn't complete what we today would consider basic general education. They had a good time in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, when there was a boom in wages, and then it's come down, and basically, roughly today, they are earning no more than what they did in 1964 in real terms. In other words, after adjusting for inflation. And who are the people whose real incomes have continued to increase? People with more than bachelor's degree, this sort of grey line, and people with a bachelor degree. In other words, the college premium is extremely high. The world labour markets are rewarding people with higher levels of education and skills, and the picture for women is largely the same, except that the income levels are going up a bit more, partly because I think women's participation in the labour market was a lot lower in the 1960s than now. So I think women are seeing a boom because of general education levels rising and greater equality in education opportunities, but women with low skills are not going to defy this wage stagnation. So what it means is that over a long period of time, some people in our economies are saying, I do not see my life improving over time. This is another one showing the consequences of inequality. There are two sets of charts, one set on the left, one set on the right. Let me explain what's on the left. The left is a map of mainland USA. Top picture shows you some measure of mobility. That is the probability of the people at the bottom 20% in their father's generation by income reaching the top 20% by income in the son's generation. So intergenerational mobility, you won't be able to read the numbers, but the darker the shade, the lower is the mobility. And you find that the low mobility areas happen to also coincide with the areas with less healthy people. Then we move to the slide on the right. That's a picture taken from France. The darker the blue color, the higher the proportion of people who voted for the National Front candidate Marine Le Pen. And if you look at it, it largely corresponds to the areas with very high unemployment. And for those of you who are somewhat more familiar with US politics, you would know that many of Mr. Trump's supporters also come from areas where the industrial core has been hollowed out and there is despair, there's despondency, and there's high unemployment. So that's the world. It's a bit not so nice. Singapore is not immune to this, and we're subject to all the same forces hitting a much, much smaller island. So let me talk to you about this small place. I suppose if you still use a map, a paper map, as some older people do, and you were eating cake at the same time, and the crumbs of the cake fell onto the map, you could easily miss Singapore. Because if not for the fact that we had to spell out the name of the country, you wouldn't be able to find it because it's so small. And you know it because you've been here a while. Despite our size, people know us because we are highly open to the rest of the world in terms of trade, investment, talent, and ideas. Which is why if you have been around Singapore, you'll find places of worship of the different major religions represented here, sometimes one next to the other. And this is just one simple statistics, is trade in goods, exports plus imports divided by GDP. We are at 318%, that's the highest in the world. There are very, very few economies that are as open as ours. Another one in our region is Malaysia. And over the years, we have weathered many, many different cycles of change, from the assembly workers in electronics to slightly more sophisticated computers to robotic assembly line. As a small country, we rely on the rule of law and the functioning international order. If I make an analogy, if you were a pedestrian, you hope that if you press a button, the cars will stop for you at the red light. If you were a large truck, you will feel a lot less need to be protected by the laws because you are so big that you could easily run a small car off the road because you are so big and we are not keen to challenge you for the road space. Singapore is small, but we put great store on the rule of the law and international order, which is why one of our top diplomats chaired the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea and managed to persuade many different nations to come together and sign this treaty on the left. And on the right is something much more recent. We worked very hard to get a convention on mediation. In other words, if you do business across borders and you have a disagreement, do you sue each other or do you go for mediation? And we are saying mediation is a good idea, why don't we do it? These are some ways to do it, and they have decided to name the convention. They have decided to sign the convention in Singapore and decide to name the convention after Singapore. So small little things like that we think are important for small countries to do. Over the years, with some luck and some hard work, I think we've brought our per capita GDP up by quite a significant amount. This is in constant US dollars, which means that it's in real terms. Put very broadly, this is a purchasing power of the average Singaporean over time. Not everybody has that much money, but on average, this is the per capita GDP. In terms of domestic policies, I don't think I have enough time to go through every one of it, but maybe I just mentioned that in terms of how we design our domestic policies in each important area, we thought through very carefully the need to balance between social equity and the discipline of the market. Let's talk a little bit about education. We inherited a patchwork education system that had parts of an education system that the British would recognize, but we found that the British education system then did not have a very strong emphasis on vocational and technical training, which, say, the German system had. So we grafted a very strong vocational and technical education pathways onto an academic system, so we have a hybrid system. And more than 2/3 of every cohort of students actually go through a vocational and technical training. So the kids you see here in Hwa Chong are the minority in their cohort, about 1/4 of their cohort. Most of our kids go through more practical, skills-based training so that they have skills and the education to prepare them for the job market. At the same time, we recognize that learning going forward in a world that is undergoing rapid technological change cannot be one where you learn in the first, between year when you are age 6 to when age 25, but you must continue learning through life. So we invented Skills Future, which is a national movement for lifelong learning. On healthcare, we again inherited a system that looks very much like a sort of NHS, government provided, government funded, very low fees at the point of use, but we have also grafted upon it other peculiarly Singaporean features, like a insurance scheme that covers everybody, a bit like the type of continental European social insurance scheme on top of that. We also have something called MediSave, which Singaporeans will know. It's a personal savings account to ensure there is personal responsibility for your own healthcare. And lastly, we have something called MediFund, which is a government scheme to help those who really cannot help themselves. So that's why we call them the 3 M's. MediSave, your own savings, MediShield Line, which is the insurance scheme, and MediFund, which is a safety net. And we have got pretty good health outcomes. One thing that will surprise many people is more than 80% of Singaporeans live in public housing. Public housing does not have that kind of odium that it does in many other cities where public housing is for the poorest segment of the population. If you were any good, you wouldn't want to walk into a public housing estate. Here, most people live in public housing, and if your Singaporean friends haven't told you, for our foreign friends here, the way a Singaporean boy would ask his girlfriend to marry him is not to ask her to marry him, but to say, shall we apply for a HDB flat? What it means, they put their name down for a flat. And almost everybody here expects to have their own home before they get married. And if not, they think it's the government's fault. So I think we've done quite well out of it. The homes are affordable. The price of the home is about 4 to 5 times annual income, and it can be paid for using your compulsory savings that we have every month. And lastly, I need to talk a little bit about the fiscal system. We have fairly competitive tax rates, but that means that our government expenditure is also not very high by the standards of the world, but we use the money in a very efficient way, and we target our subsidies on the poorest people. We don't give universal benefits to everybody, including those who are able to work and make a lot of income. We don't do that. We only target at the poor so that we can keep taxes low, because we believe that it's best for you to keep most of your income for yourself to decide what you want to use it for, instead of having the government tax the hell out of you and then we decide on your behalf who we spend on. And sometimes we spend on the wrong types of people, like people who go on welfare and so on. So, for a small economy, we really cannot run faster than a big guy, so sometimes we have to rely on technology, great planning, efficient organization in order to get ahead. So that's how we try to stay just a little ahead of the prey, the predator. We never want to become the prey. So, to summarize, where there are technological challenges, our way is not to shrink away from it, but to embrace it, but to help our people prepare for it in schools and out of schools in lifelong learning. Number 2, there are demographic challenges in Singapore. We help Singaporeans to live and work for as long as they can, and we remain open to talents and ideas. And lastly, the world is changing very fast. We always keep to this. I think you heard Mr. Bilahari, my former colleague. He's quite a colorful speaker, more interesting than me. So we try to make as many friends as we can. We try not to make enemies. People don't like us, that's their problem, but we don't go out to provoke. And we always try to stay relevant, because if you are not relevant to the rest of the world, well, I mean, nobody cares about you. And if you are then stomped on by someone, nobody cares that you don't exist anymore. Let me now quickly come to the last part, which is to talk about yourselves. I think you, by being here, tells me that you are extremely talented, and your school wants you, thinks that you can do a lot more in the world. So I think at this age, you should challenge, ask questions, and do not believe adults. Whatever we tell you, I think you should push back and ask questions and think creatively and outside the box. Do not let the conventional wisdom hold you back. Second, there is great value in diversity and being with people who are not like yourself, which is why Hwa Chong in Singapore are glad to host a program like this so that young people from different cultures get to interact. And I'm not sure whether you're sitting among your countrymen, but really you ought not to be for the duration of your stay here. And you are, I hope, mix it up a bit. And lastly, I think all the great things in the world are done by people who want to change it. So I hope you will be among those who want to change the world. Now, Bill Gates is now seen as a sort of a very rich guy, perhaps even a little old. But when he started out, his aim was to democratize computing power. Because before that, computers were locked up in big rooms. And he wanted to put computing power on your labs, on your desks. But of course, lots more other people have gone beyond him. And we now have more computing power on our phones. or our refrigerators than the first generation of computers. Okay, I think I've come to the end of my one way, and I really look forward to the second half, which is when you talk to me and I learn about what you are interested in, and then we can have a more interactive session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Tan. We would like to invite Mrs. Tan to remain on stage for the dialogue segment. Mrs. Tan, please. Delegates are invited to ask their questions via pigeonhole. Alternatively, delegates may pose their questions at the microphones located along the aisles. Kindly introduce yourself by stating your name and your country before speaking. Delegates are reminded to keep your questions brief and succinct. We are now ready to take the first question. The first question is, do you think that the advancement of our technology will increase exponentially or sigmoidally? For example, an S-curve in which it slows down after a while.
I'm not sure I want to answer that question, it's too boring. Could you go back to the rest? Because I wanted to answer one on the college premium because I thought, I'll come back to this. Actually, for now, it's exponential, but at some point you will hit the S-curve, but I think for now, it's really this way for now. Okay? Jack Peters, where are you? Okay, now I wanted to talk a little bit about the college premium one, because data on people's skills are highly lacking in today's statistical offices, which is why the only proxy measure of a person's skill is his education level. And statisticians have been collecting people's highest educational qualifications for many, many years. In all our countries, we have census of population and so on. We've always been collecting people's education level, and at that time, it was a good proxy to skills. So the college premium refers to premium given to people who have something that differentiates them from the next person, something non-routine. Now it may be a college degree, but as we know, going forward, it may be things that go beyond a college degree, like having very deep skills in, computer hacking. Many people who are very good at hacking, and because they're good at hacking, they tend to also be hired by firms doing cyber security, right? Because if you want to protect, you need to know how to hack. And many of these hackers may have an interest in computers, but not all of them have computer science degrees. So when these firms hire, they do not always ask for a computer science degree. They may organize a competition or hackathon or white hat hacker contest, and then let you hack, and then they pick the guy. So these kinds of unusual qualification and unconventional recruitment methods are becoming more common, but I wouldn't say that they form the bulk of recruitment and qualifications today. But the key point I want you to take away, so that you do not look at the chart I showed earlier and get overly fixated on college premium. A college premium is a shorthand for saying that you have a skill that is valuable, rarer in the world than what 80, 90, or 99% of the population can acquire. And in the past, for many years, statisticians could only measure that by using highest educational qualifications, but going forward, it would be a skill that's valuable, which cannot be attained by large proportion of your peers. And the hacking one is one specific example where a cybersecurity firm will not hire on the basis of a computer science degree alone. He may want to see how you really can hack or protect. And if you were still bring me a computer science degree from 1970, even if it was from MIT, it's not going to be worth as much as a kid, 17-year-old, who's penetrated somebody's the NASA's computer system or whatever, and then you hired a 17-year-old kid, despite the lack of a degree. So please view the chart I showed you as a limitation of data rather than the fact that I'm advocating for everybody to go to college. But of course, if you have ambition to go to college, it's a good thing. But beyond that degree, you really ought to have skills and that go beyond knowing your books or the mere technical, getting along with people different from you, and working at different hours of the time, because you need to interact with people in different time zones are important too. Okay, we go back to democracy because y'all like me to deal with questions that have more votes. Oh, interested in finance. Yong Chai Fan. Are you from Singapore? I'm in two minds what to say about finance. I think finance is a very knowledge-intensive industry, and certainly has created many jobs and allowed companies, even governments, to borrow or to finance important investments in the most cost-effective way. So there is real value in there. But another school of thought says that we shouldn't have all our smart people go into finance. We should have people also working on things that are real in life, like building bridges and so on. So I'll say, if you're interested in finance, by all means pursue a course of study that brings you to finance, and it may not be economics, it could be physics, it could be mathematics. There are lots of quants and what they call rocket scientists on Wall Street. So it's not clear-cut that finance degree leads to a finance job and a maths degree leads to a maths teacher job. I think the world is not that sort of linear. And the other is that how sure are you that you want to do finance? If your school has an internship program or some job exposure program, maybe you want to hang around the office of these people and take a look, and you may find that no, that's not the job I want to, even though this is where the big bucks may look like they are coming from. So I would say maybe too early to decide now. In fact, you might want to use your university days as a time to explore your interests. So if you want to apply to the Yale NUS College to do a liberal arts degree while you figure out what you like, that's another way. Right? I think specializing a bit too early may not be right for some of us. Others are very clear, very early on in life, that they want to be the best hacker there is in the world, then please go ahead. So I think I'll say maybe study something that keep your quantitative reasoning to a high level of practice. Try and find a way of getting near one of these offices to work there for a while, to make the coffee for the people there, and then see if you like it. You never know, and then you may change your mind and become a literature major. Nobody knows, right? Too young to make these decisions, you know. Next. Oh, 23 votes. Oh, big data. Yeah. I think the rules on data privacy, confidentiality are evolving, and in the countries that are represented here, I think the laws and societal attitudes towards them are quite different. There are many people in Singapore, for example, who willingly fill in their names and their ID number on lucky draw tickets and just give it to a company. And then another shop will say, hey, if you join our loyalty program, you get 10% off every time you come, and you willingly give up your name and your ID number. Then there are societies where you are forbidden from asking for a person's ethnic origin. So I think there's a variation in the world. There will be some convergence in terms of protection for the consumers, but I don't think that the whole world will converge to one standard, because some of us, for example, are keen to acquire the services. For example, before I came here, I decided to check how long it will take me to get here. So I used Google Maps. And Google Map is time sensitive, right? It may be 15 minutes where I was going, but last night when I checked at home, it was much shorter because it was 11 p.m. I have gotten here in much shorter time. Now, how would Google Map know whether it takes 10 minutes or 15 minutes? It's because a lot of people have willingly given their data when they were using Google Map. And those data then allow them to look at the patterns and then be able to return many of us a service that tells me, no, it may take you 15 minutes if you come at 1 o'clock and 5 minutes if you try to come at 11 p.m. So I'll say it will converge because consumers will want to assert their rights, but there will be societies where people are more willing to trade that for greater convenience. But I do expect some convergence because people will get a bit more jealous about the way they protect their own personal information. And companies are also more vigilant now because the bridges have been not very pleasant. Are you Jenny? Since you're nodding, so okay. All right? Okay. I'm just guessing. I'm making an informed guess. I don't have facial recognition technology up here, but that shows you the human is actually smarter than most computers. Huh? Okay, that's gratifying.
Participants, please be reminded that you may also ask your questions at the microphones located along the aisles.
Okay, there's this 17 votes one. This kind of big question, as a geopolitical type question. I'll put it this way. The domestic political arrangements for each country is for their own people to decide whether it is China, Japan, Singapore, Indonesia, or Australia. What the rest of us have to do is to deal with whoever is the leader of that country. We cannot wish for anything else. I wish that the Chinese would have Mr. X, Mr. C is Mr. X, and the Americans will have Mr. Y as the president or the leader. We can't wish that on another person, but we just have to work with whoever we have. I think I wanted to talk a little bit about lenses. I think this one, stated this way, is factual. In many democracies, the system is designed to be inefficient, right? Because you want checks and balances, because you do not want any part of government to become dominant, because you believe that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So you have different, what's the word for it? The three, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. The three, what? Three branches. Yeah. So we try to have them balance off each other. So Parliament makes the laws, the courts enforce them, and the executive implements the laws and so on. So I think many of them also set term limits because of a fear that one single person with a lot of power staying in their position for too long may be a force that is more negative than positive. So some democracies have built into their system term limits. What has been the empirical evidence? I'll say the empirical evidence has been mixed. Let me share an example from the Philippines, which is a neighbor in ASEAN. They've had presidents of different types, and some have stayed longer, and some have stayed much shorter. And there was a period where there was a president who came in after a very difficult period in their history, and he was extremely effective. Unfortunately, he could only do 2 terms, I think. And yet, objectively, because he had brought about stability, law and order, opened up the economy, created jobs, really, even if he had done for 1 more term, I don't think it would have been to the detriment of the Filipino people. But because of term limits, he couldn't, so he left. So that's one example where the term limit may not have served them. But there are many other places where term limit would certainly have served them, but anyway, the dictators have stated it didn't matter whether there was a term limit in the constitution or not. Right? So I'll say that this one tells you that there are lenses, there are assumptions, and there are also lived experiences in different political systems. I will not try to tell you whether it's good or bad, but this certainly comes from a perspective that we think that someone who stays too long is bad. The Chinese may tell you that staying a bit longer provides for stability, which is, or the lack of stability, is actually one of the biggest worry of the Chinese government. Because their recent history going backward has not been one of stability. It has been one of chaos, weakness, invasion by foreign militaries, and period of, if you like, national decline and disgrace and whatever the Chinese would say. And therefore, for them, stability is very important. But I wouldn't want to make a specific point on this except to say that I think at your age, you may want to take a look at different systems. I don't think that anyone is perfect. We're all seeking the least imperfect way. And we're also seeking the least imperfect way compatible with the underlying cultures. I want to just make a last point. This is a personal point, has nothing to do with the countries here, which is that I've seen in different parts of the world democratic processes and structures built upon what are essentially feudal practices in their societies, where patronage is rampant, where a rich landowner will basically tell everybody on his land how to vote. And then you say, oh yeah, it's democracy, someone got voted in. But if you look at it carefully, it's a whole bunch of cronies, friends of friends and friends. You check the Senate, you check the upper house, lower house, it's filled with people who are connected. So the veneer of democratic institutions and democratic processes are mixed up with what I consider highly feudal practices, and I'm not sure that that is better or worse for the people, but I just thought to remind you that when you want to be critical, as I asked you to be, you really need to look at some of these. And since you have friends from different countries, you should ask them how they feel about their own systems. Okay, this one I didn't use my AI. Would you like to identify yourself? What? This is your first name? You're Suhidi? Okay, good. Okay, next one.
In the interest of time, we will take 2 more questions.
Oh, okay. What should I answer? Maybe I do a quick one on international organizations because I just came back from a meeting. I need to explain that there was a G7, which is a group of rich economies in the world. They're all in the developed world. And then there was a G20 born out of the last global financial crisis, where it was no longer possible for major decisions in the world to be made by countries in North America, Europe, and Japan. So they expanded a group of 7 to the G20 and included large emerging economies such as China, India, Brazil, Mexico, Indonesia, Argentina, and so on. So it was more representative of the world, covered 85% of the world GDP. Unfortunately, Singapore is not big enough to be included, so we were not part of the G20. But the last 8 years or so, we have been invited to G20 meetings because we have tried to become relevant, and we go there and we contribute to the discussion, and we try to represent the views of the 15% who are not in the G20. So I have a particular interest in talking about the role of the IMF and World Bank. IMF and World Bank were set up after the Second World War to help to rebuild the world economy and also to provide certain broad rules of engagement for the world. Actually, they are part of a three bodies. It's IMF, which is the agency that looks after international financial flow, help country out of what we call balance of payments crisis. That means you run out of money to buy overseas things. Number 2, the World Bank, which makes loans to poorer countries in order to build infrastructure. And the third institution in here was what later became the World Trade Organization. to set rules on international trading. And these three institutions have been anchored, and I think the prosperity, the long period of prosperity we have seen after the Second World War across the world is due in no small part to the fact that we have these institutions that help us to grow together and help resolve conflicts and crises along the way. It was not perfect. The name IMF has a very bad connotation across many economies, including in Asia, Korea, for example, because it was a period where IMF had to come in and serve bitter pill to the population, fiscal tightening, unemployment, and so on came in. But point is, they help to keep the world on a fairly stable financial, trade, and growth path. But these institutions were set up more than 50 years ago, where the large economies were in the West, and now there are newer guys coming up. And they basically knock on the doors of these big guys and say, look, can you let us in? And you know the dangers of incumbency. Once you're in the door, you are in the club, an exclusive club. You do not want to let in more members, right? Because it makes the club noisy and potentially smelly and dirty, so you try to keep people out. And the problem is that when you keep people out and they get big enough, they will have to ask, do I want to join your club or I set up my own club? Which is why I think there's a need to review these institutions. Deputy Prime Minister Mr. Tharman Shanmugaratnam of Singapore was asked by the G20 to chair an eminence person group to look at global financial governance, to try and look at some of these institutions and the regional banks, the Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, and so on, to see how their roles would have to change. And it's timely because economic powers have shifted in the world, and there's a need to accommodate the new emerging economies while keeping to multilateral rules of engagement. The study is not done, but I just think that there is a need to try and update and refresh these institutions so that the world can continue to have more stable and orderly ways of growing and to interact with each other. Obviously, in Singapore, we would be against any unilateral measures because as a small country, we have no ability to fight back. It's like the pedestrian, we love traffic rules and traffic cops. But when there are big guys, they prefer no cops and no rules. Or they prefer to talk bilaterally, because the two of us make a deal and that's it. We don't have to care about the small guy. So we would prefer that multilateral institutions and rules remain. They can be updated, can be refreshed to take into account new realities, but we are not sure that the world will be better off by not having them. There's this link to China's Belt and Road initiative. I think we should look at Belt and Road through different lenses. Of course, you can see it completely as a sinister thing, but you could also see it as something that's important in order to build up the infrastructure that many countries along the Belt and Road need. I think what we are looking for is cost-effective and useful infrastructure that will allow us to, for example, import food, medicine for our people, export coffee, cocoa, or palm oil from my country so that we can become more prosperous. So I think as long as these Belt and Road investments are put in the right places to increase economic capacity and increase the ability of countries to trade, I think they are plus points, and I don't think we should see them entirely as a sinister things. But I think all said and done, as a Singaporean, we prefer multilateral everything. Okay, there was one more personal one. I'll take that one because I think it's fun to end with something personal. If you don't mind, just show us this one. This one, right? So I thought you asked because I'm a woman, but if a man were to come, you probably wouldn't ask this question. And important thing to think about is that going forward, we certainly hope that gender roles will be more equal everywhere in the world, and that we have moms who sort of go, oh no, I'm not coming to the office today because my kid is ill. I can tell you my deputy secretary, who's a man, does that to me. When my son is sick, I'm going off. Bye. I said, yes, go, right? Because I think we like to see a world with more equal gender roles. Then both parents will have to take responsibility, not just to be at work, but also at home. I think that is really how we do it. There's no magic formula. You probably work more hours in a day. You have much less time for yourself. It's a matter of balance. It's a matter of priority. At some point in your life, work is very important. At some point, you'll be family, and you have to make your own choice. The worst thing you could do is to say that I cannot resist pressure from my peers to do it one way or the other. No, it's your personal decision, and you just have to decide, for example, during a certain point in your life that family comes first, and other points I think you can work very hard, 23 hours out, 24, whatever it is. Okay, so I think that should more or less do it, right? You look very interested, so I think timekeeping is important. Yeah.
In the interest of time, unfortunately, we will not be able to take any more questions. Thank you, Mrs. Tan, for sharing your valuable insights. I will now proceed to summarize our discussion with Mrs. Tan. Mrs. Tan mentioned the stance of Singapore on topics such as geopolitics and technology, as well as the stance of many other countries. And she gave us all the advice that we should be critical and ask our friends from other countries, which I believe is very timely as it links to what this APYLS summit aims to do. We hope that all delegates have gained deeper insight into the issues discussed today. We would now like to invite Mr. Pang on stage to present a token of appreciation to our guest speaker, Mrs. Tan Ching Yi. We have now come to the end of the second summit dialogue. Once again, we would like to thank Mrs. Tan Ching Yi for taking time off her busy schedule to join us in the discussions today.